Welcome to another deep dive. We're exploring some fascinating stories and insights that you sent our way. Today we're turning to the book of Genesis, chapters 11 through 20. We're going to unpack the tale of Abraham. So you might be wondering how Abraham fits into this larger biblical narrative. Well, his story really sets the stage for so much that follows, touching on faith and obedience and family and the very beginnings of a covenant that still shapes religious traditions today.
It all starts with setting the stage. Even before we meet Abraham, Genesis 11 paints this picture of humanity united by one language, striving to build the infamous Tower of Babel to reach the heavens.
Okay, so how does this Tower of Babel story connect to Abraham?
This event, with people scattering and languages diversifying, is truly pivotal. It paves the way for different nations and cultures, setting the scene for Abraham's unique calling in a now divided world.
So it's like creating a diverse world where Abraham's story can unfold.
Precisely. And then in Genesis 11, verses 10 to 26, we're given the genealogy from Shem to Terah, Abraham's father. This is like tracing the roots of a family tree. It connects Abraham to the broader narrative of humanity after the Great Flood.
So we've got the backdrop, a world brimming with diverse people and cultures. Now let's get to Abraham himself. In Genesis 12, God calls him to leave his comfortable life in Ur of the Chaldees, promising him a great nation, blessings, a great name, and something truly extraordinary, to be a blessing to all families on earth.
This call is a major turning point, not just for Abraham, but for the entire trajectory of God's plan. It's a promise with huge implications, setting off a chain of events that echoes through generations.
Wow, talk about pressure. So how does Abraham respond to this?
Imagine being called to leave everything you know, venturing into the unknown based on faith and a promise. Well, Abraham, at 75 years old, embarks on this incredible journey with his wife, Sarah, and his nephew, Lot. They travel through Canaan, building altars along the way, marking a growing connection with God.
It's a powerful testament to his trust, especially considering the challenges he faces almost immediately. Genesis 12 describes a famine in Canaan that forces Abraham and his family to journey to Egypt.
And this is where we encounter an ethical dilemma. Out of fear for his own safety, Abraham decides to deceive the Egyptians, claiming Sarah is his sister.
Hold on, so he's willing to put Sarah in a potentially compromising situation to protect himself.
Yeah.
That seems at odds with his trust in God.
It does raise questions, doesn't it? It shows us the human element in Abraham's story. He's chosen by God, yes, but he's still susceptible to fear and makes flawed choices. It certainly adds a layer of complexity to his character.
Absolutely. This isn't some idealized hero. This is a man grappling with real human emotions. And of course, this deception has consequences.
Indeed. The Pharaoh, believing Sarah to be unmarried, takes her into his household. But God intervenes, sending plagues upon Pharaoh and his house, revealing the truth about Sarah and Abraham's relationship.
So there are immediate repercussions for Abraham's lack of trust. How does this impact him moving forward?
Well, upon their return to Canaan, Abraham's wealth increases, leading to strife between his herdsmen and those of Lot. They decide to separate amicably, with Lot choosing the fertile Jordan plain and Abraham remaining in Canaan.
It's interesting that even amidst this potential conflict, Abraham prioritizes peace and family. He allows Lot to choose first, which shows generosity and a continued reliance on God's provision.
Yes, and significantly, in Genesis 13, God reaffirms his promise of the land to Abraham and his descendants, solidifying the covenant even after Abraham's missteps.
It really underscores God's faithfulness to his promises, even when humans stumble. This covenant isn't about perfect behavior, but about God's unwavering commitment.
You've got it. And speaking of challenges, things take a dramatic turn in Genesis 14. Imagine this. Your nephew is captured, and you're leading a small force against a powerful king. This chapter recounts a war involving several kings, culminating in Lot's capture by King Chedorlaomer.
That's intense. So how does Abraham, this man who just moments ago was prioritizing peace, respond?
He rises to the challenge, leading his men to defeat Chedorlaomer and rescue Lot. It's a remarkable display of courage and leadership. It further solidifies his character.
Wow. Talk about a plot twist.
Ugh.
But amidst all this action, we're also introduced to a rather mysterious figure, Melchizedek, the king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. Yeah, you've probably heard about Melchizedek. But he's a figure shrouded in mystery. He appears seemingly out of nowhere to bless Abraham and receive tithes from him.
His origins are unclear, and his sudden appearance and disappearance raise questions about his connection to God. It makes him a subject of much debate and interpretation.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the story. It makes you wonder about the different ways God might interact with humanity.
Exactly. But let's not get sidetracked. Genesis 15 marks a significant development in God's covenant with Abraham. God promises him countless descendants, as numerous as the stars in the sky.
That's an incredible promise, especially considering what we know about Sarah's age. So how did Abraham react to this?
Well, initially, he's filled with doubt. This prompts God to provide reassurance through a vision and a symbolic ritual. You've probably heard about circumcision as a Jewish practice, but its roots go back to Abraham.
Oh, you mean the covenant of circumcision.
Yes, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp pass between animal pieces, signifying the covenant. It's a powerful image, visually representing God's commitment to his promise. And to further solidify this covenant, God institutes circumcision as a physical sign.
That's a pretty profound symbol, marking a physical and spiritual connection to the covenant.
Absolutely. But amidst this promise, God also reveals a difficult truth. Abraham's descendants will be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years before returning to Canaan. This foreshadows future hardship, adding a layer of complexity to the promise.
So even with this incredible promise of descendants, there's a shadow of hardship looming. It seems like Abraham's journey is full of these contrasting moments of blessing and challenge.
That's precisely what makes his story so compelling. He experiences moments of great faith and moments of doubt.
It definitely makes him feel more human and relatable. Speaking of relatable, with the promise of descendants still central, Genesis 16 introduces us to Hagar, Sarah's handmaid.
Ah, yes, Hagar. Sarah, still unable to conceive, suggests that Abraham have a child with Hagar. It's a decision born out of desperation and societal pressures, but one with far-reaching consequences.
It definitely adds a new layer of complexity to their family dynamics.
Indeed. Hagar becomes pregnant and her relationship with Sarah deteriorates, leading Hagar to flee into the wilderness.
This poor woman, caught in the middle of this complex situation.
However, she has a powerful encounter with an angel of the Lord. The angel instructs Hagar to return to Sarah, but he also promises her numerous descendants through her son, Ishmael. It's a beautiful moment. It highlights God's compassion for those who are marginalized.
It's a reminder that God's care extends to everyone, even those in vulnerable positions. So Hagar returns, giving birth to Ishmael, but the tension within the family remains, creating a backdrop for the next chapter in their story.
And this leads us to Genesis 17, a pivotal moment. God appears again to Abraham, changing his name from Abram to Abraham, and Sarah's name from Sarai to Sarah.
So God's changing their names. That's interesting. It seems pretty symbolic.
It is. It signifies a new chapter, a fresh start. And the formalization of the covenant. God reiterates his promise of a son through Sarah, even though they are, well, past the age of having children.
It's got to be hard to fathom. I mean, imagine being in their shoes, hearing this promise.
Well, Abraham laughs in disbelief at the prospect of a son at 100 years old, and Sarah, at 90, does the same when she overhears.
I can't blame them. But is God offended by their laughter?
Not at all. It's a human reaction to something that defies logic and experience. It reveals their struggle to reconcile their faith with the seemingly impossible.
It makes them seem more real, more relatable, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It reminds us that faith isn't always about blind acceptance, but about wrestling with doubts and uncertainties.
Okay, so God changes their names, reaffirms his promise. What happens next?
Well, remember those 3 visitors Abraham welcomed earlier in chapter 18? While 2 of them continue toward Sodom, 1 stays with Abraham. It's during this conversation that the Lord repeats the promise of a son to be born to Sarah. And that's when Sarah laughs from inside the tent.
So God's sort of teasing her a little bit.
There's definitely a sense of playfulness in this interaction. God questions Sarah's laughter, and when she tries to deny it out of fear, he gently points out, "No, but you did laugh."
I love those little glimpses into God's personality. It shows a more personal and approachable side to him.
Mhm.
But this lighthearted moment is followed by a very somber revelation, right?
Yes, the tone shifts dramatically as the Lord reveals his plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness.
That's when Abraham really shows his character. He boldly intercedes for the cities, pleading with God to spare them if righteous people can be found.
Exactly. Abraham is no longer focused solely on his own well-being or his promises, but is deeply concerned for the well-being of others, even those considered wicked.
It's a powerful example of the impact one person can have when they stand up for what's right.
It certainly is, and what follows is a remarkable dialogue. Abraham negotiates with God, gradually reducing the number of righteous people needed to save the cities, from 50 all the way down to 10.
Wow, so he's really pushing back, advocating for those cities. What does this tell us about God?
Well, it suggests that God isn't a rigid, unyielding judge, but is open to persuasion and desires to show mercy whenever possible.
So even in the face of impending judgment, there's still room for compassion
Yeah.
and a change of heart.
Precisely. Sadly, though, not even 10 righteous people could be found in Sodom. Genesis 19 tells the story of two angels arriving in the city. Now Lot, remembering his uncle's hospitality, welcomes them into his home.
It seems like Abraham's example is having a ripple effect, even in a place like Sodom.
It's an interesting observation. Even in a city known for its wickedness, Lot still shows kindness to strangers.
But that kindness is quickly overshadowed by the darkness of the city. The men of Sodom surround Lot's house, demanding he bring the angels out to them with evil intentions.
It's a terrifying scene, highlighting the depravity that had taken root in Sodom.
And in a desperate attempt to protect his guests, Lot makes a truly horrifying offer. He offers his own daughters to the mob.
It's a difficult passage to read and interpret, but it underscores the extreme danger the angels faced. Remember, the text doesn't condone Lot's actions, but rather portrays them as a consequence of the city's pervasive wickedness.
So how do the angels react to this?
They immediately intervene, pulling Lot back into the house and striking the men outside with blindness. They then urge Lot and his family to flee, because God's judgment is about to fall on the city.
It sounds like a scene from a movie. But Lot hesitates, doesn't he? He pleads with the angels to let him escape to a nearby town instead of the mountains.
That's right, he's hesitant. But eventually he flees with his wife and two daughters. And just as they escape, Sodom and Gomorrah are consumed by a fiery destruction.
It's a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked sin and the reality of God's judgment. What a stark contrast to Abraham's earlier intercession.
Yes, it highlights the tension between God's desire for mercy and the necessity of judgment when wickedness prevails. But there's another layer to this story. Remember Lot's wife. She disobeys the angel's command not to look back and is turned into a pillar of salt.
That's a chilling reminder of the importance of obedience in the face of danger.
Yeah.
It's almost as if she's frozen in time, forever caught between the past and the future.
It's often interpreted as a warning against longing for what's been left behind, especially when it's associated with sin and destruction.
And then things take an even darker turn. Remember, Lot and his daughters are now alone. Having fled the destruction, they find themselves in a cave, where the daughters, fearing they'll never find husbands, decide to get Lot drunk and have children by him.
This is a difficult passage, no doubt. It's often seen as a commentary on the deep-seated corruption that had spread through the region and the lasting consequences of the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Even those who escaped the physical destruction are still grappling with its moral fallout.
It's a stark reminder that the impact of sin can ripple through generations. And after this harrowing episode, we shift back to Abraham. But sadly, we see a familiar pattern emerging.
Yes. Despite all that's happened, despite God's faithfulness and protection, we find Abraham repeating a past mistake. He's sojourning in Nimbar, and once again claims that Sarah is his sister, not his wife.
That's surprising, considering his past experiences. You'd think he would have learned his lesson.
It does make you wonder about the roots of this behavior. Is it simply fear? Or is there a deeper struggle with trust?
And as you might guess, history repeats itself. Abimelech, the king of Gerar, takes Sarah into his household, thinking she's unmarried. It seems like Abraham's deception always has unintended consequences.
That's right. And it highlights how even those who are close to God can struggle with recurring patterns of behavior. But thankfully, God again intervenes, this time through a dream. He warns Abimelech that Sarah is, in fact, married, and that harming her will bring severe consequences.
So God is still protecting Sarah, even though Abraham isn't. How does Abimelech react to this?
He's furious, of course, and confronts Abraham, demanding an explanation for his deceit.
And what does Abraham say? Does he finally take responsibility?
Well, he offers the same excuse as before, fear for his safety. It shows that he's still grappling with his insecurities, despite all the evidence of God's protection.
It's a good reminder that spiritual growth isn't always a straight line. But despite Abraham's deception, what does God do?
In an incredible act of grace, God heals Abimelech and his household. And Abraham, recognizing his wrongdoing, prays for them.
So even in the midst of this mess, there's forgiveness and reconciliation. What a beautiful ending to this chapter. But we've covered so much ground, from the Tower of Babel to Sodom and Gomorrah, to Abraham's repeated deceptions and God's unwavering faithfulness. It's mind-boggling to think that all this happens before we even get to the birth of Isaac.
It really is a whirlwind of a story. But you're right, the most well-known part of Abraham's story is still to come. And that brings us to Genesis 21 and the long-awaited birth of Isaac.
Finally, after all this time, All these twists and turns, the promise is fulfilled.
Imagine the joy, the relief, and maybe even a little disbelief. Abraham at 100 years old and Sarah at 90, welcoming the son they were promised. It really underscores God's power to do what seems humanly impossible.
It's a moment that must have felt like a culmination of everything they'd been through. But this joy is quickly overshadowed by tension within the family, isn't it?
Yes. Sarah witnesses Ishmael, Hagar's son, mocking Isaac. She becomes concerned for Isaac's inheritance and future, and asks Abraham to send Hagar and Ishmael away.
That must have been our heartbreaking request for Abraham. Ishmael is his son too, and he cares for him deeply. How does he respond to this?
He's torn, of course, but God reassures Abraham, promising to make Ishmael into a great nation as well. With that assurance, Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael away, providing them with provisions for their journey.
It's a poignant scene, picturing them wandering in the wilderness. It really highlights the complexities of family dynamics and the ripple effects of past choices.
It's a reminder that even in the fulfillment of God's promises, there can be pain and difficult decisions. But even in this separation, God's compassion is evident. He hears Hagar's cries and provides for her and Ishmael, ensuring their survival.
It's reassuring to see God's care extending to both branches of Abraham's family. But the story takes an even more dramatic turn, with what's often considered the ultimate test of Abraham's faith.
That's right. God instructs Abraham to take Isaac, his beloved son, his miracle son, to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering.
Wow. That command is jarring, to say the least. It challenges our understanding of God and raises profound questions about sacrifice and obedience. What must have been going through Abraham's mind?
Imagine the emotional turmoil. How could he reconcile this command with God's previous promises, with his love for Isaac? But remarkably, Abraham chooses to obey. He sets out with Isaac, carrying the wood for the sacrifice, a chilling detail that underscores the weight of this test.
It's a scene that has captivated and disturbed readers for centuries. So does Abraham go through with it.
Just as he raises the knife to sacrifice Isaac, an angel of the Lord intervenes, stopping him at the last moment.
What a relief. What's the significance of this dramatic intervention?
It shows us that God doesn't desire human sacrifice. Instead, he's looking for obedience that's rooted in complete trust, a willingness to surrender everything, even our most precious possessions.
It's a profound lesson about the nature of true faith. So what happens next?
Abraham, demonstrating his unwavering faith, offers a ram caught in a thicket as a substitute for Isaac. He names the place the Lord will provide, reflecting his deep understanding of God's faithfulness.
It's a powerful moment of surrender and trust, acknowledging that God will always provide, even when we can't see how.
And this act of substitution points to a much larger theological concept. It foreshadows the ultimate sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who would be offered as the Lamb of God to take away the sins of the world.
It's incredible to see how these stories from Genesis connect to the broader narrative of the Bible. So what happens to Abraham after this?
He lives a long life, dying at the age of 175. And here's a detail I find quite touching. He's buried by both his sons, Isaac and Ishmael.
That suggests a reconciliation, a sense of unity. Despite the earlier separation, it's a fitting end to a life marked by both tremendous blessings and difficult trials.
It really is. Abraham's story is a tapestry of faith, doubt, obedience, deception, love, and loss. He's not portrayed as a flawless hero, but as a complex individual, wrestling with the challenges of living a life of faith.
So as we reach the end of this deep dive, what's the key takeaway for our listener today? What should they be pondering as they go about their day?
I think Abraham's story invites us to consider how these narratives have shaped the way we understand faith and our relationship with God. His journey is full of contradictions, just like our own. It reminds us that faith isn't about perfection, but about a willingness to trust and follow, even when the path is uncertain.
It's been a fascinating journey through the life of a man who, despite his flaws, is still considered the father of many nations and a pivotal figure in religious history. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the richness and complexity of the stories that shape our world.